17-year-old Maya Chen had endured 3 years of relentless torment at Lincoln Valley High School, watching helplessly as her carefully crafted homework assignments were destroyed, her lunch money stolen, and her dreams slowly crushed by a group of bullies who seemed untouchable. What none of them knew was that beneath her oversized sweaters and quiet demeanor, Maya possessed skills that could end their reign of terror in seconds. When Tyler Brooks and his crew decided to burn her final history project in front of the entire cafeteria, they triggered a transformation that would leave them crying for mercy and change the social hierarchy of their school forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. By the end of this story, you'll discover how years of hidden discipline became the weapon that brought justice to the most unlikely hero. Maya Chen pressed her back against the cold metal of her locker, clutching her worn canvas backpack against her chest like a shield as the familiar sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the hallway. At 5 feet 2 inches tall, with shoulder-length black hair that she kept tucked behind wire-rimmed glasses, Maya had perfected the art of becoming invisible at Lincoln Valley High School. Her petite frame was always hidden beneath oversized cardigans and loose-fitting jeans that her mother bought from discount stores, clothing that served the dual purpose of stretching their family budget and helping Maya disappear into the background of teenage social dynamics. The hallways of Lincoln Valley High buzzed with the typical energy of a Monday morning in October. Students clustered around lockers discussing weekend adventures that Maya had only observed from the periphery of her bedroom window. She lived just 3 blocks from the school in a modest 2-bedroom apartment above Chen's family restaurant, where her mother worked 16-hour days serving authentic Chinese cuisine to a community that barely acknowledged their existence beyond placing takeout orders. Maya's father had returned to Taiwan when she was 12, leaving behind only promises to send money that arrived sporadically, and a daughter who learned early that relying on others only led to disappointment. The social ecosystem at Lincoln Valley operated according to unwritten rules that Maya had studied and memorized during her 3 years as a student. At the apex stood the athletes, particularly the football and basketball players whose victories brought glory to the school and whose parents donated generously to various programs. Just below them were the popular girls who dated these athletes, followed by students whose families held prominent positions in the community through business ownership or professional success. Maya existed in the vast territory reserved for invisible students, those who moved through their high school years without making waves, forming lasting friendships, or leaving any memorable impression on their classmates. Tyler Brooks commanded the social hierarchy from his position as starting quarterback for the Lincoln Valley Lions, a role he had inherited along with his father's imposing 6'3" frame, sandy brown hair, and the kind of natural athleticism that college scouts noticed during their sophomore year. His family owned Brooks Construction, the largest building company in the county, and their name appeared on donation plaques throughout the school district. Tyler's inner circle consisted of Jake Morrison, whose father was the town's police chief, Marcus Webb, whose family controlled the largest car dealership in 3 counties, and Ryan Foster, whose mother served as the high school principal. The protection these family connections provided meant that Tyler and his friends operated with virtual immunity from consequences, a fact that every student at Lincoln Valley understood intuitively. Teachers overlooked their disruptive behavior, administrators dismissed complaints against them, and other students learned quickly that challenging their authority resulted in social exile or worse. Maya had witnessed this system in action countless times, watching as other students who dared to stand up to Tyler's group found themselves isolated, humiliated, or transferred to different schools when the harassment became unbearable. Maya's first encounter with Tyler's attention had occurred during her freshman year when she made the mistake of earning the highest grade in their shared world history class. Mrs. Patterson had announced the test results publicly, praising Maya's perfect score while noting that several students, including Tyler, had barely achieved passing grades. The humiliation of being academically outperformed by the quiet Asian girl who never spoke in class had triggered Tyler's interest in making Maya's life miserable, an interest that had only intensified over the subsequent 3 years. The harassment had begun with subtle forms of intimidation designed to establish dominance without attracting adult attention. Tyler would accidentally bump into Maya in hallways, causing her to drop her books and scramble to collect them while other students stepped over her supplies. His friends would occupy the seats around her in the cafeteria, engaging in loud conversations filled with casual racism and stereotypes that made Maya's cheeks burn with shame while she ate her lunch in silence. They discovered that Maya was sensitive about her family's financial situation and began making pointed comments about discount clothing and free lunch programs whenever she was within hearing distance. As Maya progressed through her sophomore year, the harassment escalated to more direct forms of persecution that tested the boundaries of what teachers and administrators would ignore. Tyler began intercepting Maya's homework assignments, either stealing them outright or damaging them in ways that appeared accidental to outside observers. Her carefully researched English papers would disappear from her locker, forcing her to reconstruct them from memory and accept lower grades for late submissions. Science lab reports would be contaminated with spilled chemicals that rendered them unreadable, incidents that Tyler's group dismissed as clumsiness, while sympathetic teachers reluctantly marked Maya's assignments as incomplete. The psychological impact of this sustained campaign was devastating for Maya's academic performance and mental health. She began arriving at school earlier and staying later to avoid encounters with Tyler's group during busy hallway transitions. Her grades, once consistently excellent, began suffering as anxiety about potential harassment made it difficult to concentrate during classes. Maya started skipping lunch periods to hide in the library, surviving on granola bars and fruit that she brought from home, rather than risk the daily humiliation of navigating the cafeteria where Tyler held court with his admirers. Maya's mother, Maya Chen, remained largely unaware of her daughter's struggles due to the demanding schedule that kept her at the restaurant from early morning until late evening. The few times Maya had attempted to discuss the situation, her mother's response reflected the immigrant mentality that had shaped her own survival strategies in America. Lynn advised Maya to keep her head down, focus on her studies, and remember that education was their family's only path to a better future. She reminded Maya that complaining about unfair treatment would only draw unwanted attention to their family and potentially harm the restaurant's relationship with the community. The isolation Maya experienced at school was compounded by her lack of close friendships or support systems among her peers. Her academic focus and quiet demeanor had prevented her from developing the social connections that might have provided protection or comfort during difficult times. Other students who might have sympathized with her situation were too afraid of becoming targets themselves to offer assistance or solidarity. Maya understood their reluctance and harbored no resentment toward classmates who chose self-preservation over standing up for justice. What none of Maya's tormentors, or even her mother, knew was that Maya possessed skills and knowledge that could have ended their harassment immediately and decisively. 3 evenings per week and every Saturday morning for the past 6 years, Maya had been training at Master Kim's traditional Taekwondo academy, a small studio located in the basement of a strip mall 15 minutes from her home. She had begun training at age 11, after a particularly difficult week of middle school bullying had left her feeling helpless and desperate for some form of personal empowerment. Master Kim Sung-ho was a 63-year-old immigrant from South Korea who had opened his academy not to make money, but to preserve and share the traditional martial arts knowledge he had acquired during 40 years of dedicated practice. His students paid modest fees that barely covered the studio's rent, but Master Kim believed that martial arts training should be accessible to young people regardless of their family's financial circumstances. He had recognized something special in Maya during her first tentative visit to his studio, a combination of natural athleticism, mental discipline, and deep-seated determination that reminded him of his most dedicated students from his youth and soul. Under Master Kim's patient instruction, Maya had progressed through the traditional belt rankings with steady determination and exceptional skill. She had earned her yellow belt within 6 months, demonstrating not only the required techniques, but also the philosophical understanding that Master Kim considered essential for true martial arts mastery. Her advancement to green belt, blue belt, and red belt had followed a similar pattern of technical excellence, combined with growing emotional maturity and self-control that impressed her instructor and fellow students. The physical transformation that accompanied Maya's martial arts training was subtle but significant. Beneath her concealing clothing, she had developed lean muscle definition, lightning-fast reflexes, and the kind of explosive power that could deliver devastating techniques with minimal telegraphing or preparation. Her legs had become particularly strong from countless hours of practicing kicks, while her core strength allowed her to generate tremendous force through proper body mechanics and timing. More importantly, Maya had developed the mental discipline and emotional control that separated true martial artists from simple fighters. Master Kim had emphasized repeatedly that martial arts skills were never to be used for aggression, revenge, or showing off, but only for protecting oneself or others from genuine physical danger. He had taught Maya that true strength came from the ability to remain calm under pressure, to de-escalate conflicts through wisdom and patience, and to resort to physical techniques only when no other options remained.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
These lessons had shaped Maya's response to Tyler's harassment, as she convinced herself that psychological bullying did not constitute the kind of immediate physical threat that would justify using her training. Maya's current belt rank was red belt with black stripe, just one testing away from achieving her first-degree black belt, a milestone that typically required 5 to 7 years of dedicated training to reach. She possessed a comprehensive arsenal of techniques, including powerful kicks that could break boards and bricks, precise hand strikes that could disable opponents instantly, and grappling skills that allowed her to control or escape from larger attackers. Her speed and accuracy had reached levels that impressed even Master Kim, who rarely offered praise and maintained the traditional Korean approach of pushing students to constant improvement rather than celebrating achievements. The disconnect between Maya's capabilities and her willingness to use them created an internal tension that had been building for months as Tyler's harassment continued to escalate. She spent her training sessions working through the frustration and anger that accumulated during her school days, channeling those emotions into more powerful techniques and deeper commitment to her martial arts practice. Master Kim had noticed the increased intensity in Maya's training and suspected that she was dealing with challenges outside the studio, but he respected her privacy and trusted that she would ask for guidance if she needed it. Maya's dedication to her training had required significant sacrifices that further isolated her from typical teenage social activities. While her classmates attended parties, football games, and social gatherings on weekends, Maya spent her free time at the studio or practicing forms in her bedroom. She had missed school dances, birthday celebrations, and other events that might have helped her develop friendships or social connections. Her mother supported the training expenses because she believed martial arts would teach Maya discipline and respect, but she didn't fully understand the level of skill her daughter had achieved or the potential it represented. The secrecy surrounding Maya's martial arts training was deliberate and carefully maintained. She changed clothes at the studio to avoid anyone from school seeing her in her uniform, and she never discussed her training with classmates who might have been curious about her after-school activities. Maya understood instinctively that revealing her skills would fundamentally change her relationship with Tyler and his friends, potentially escalating their harassment to more dangerous levels, or prompting them to target her in ways that would force her to respond with physical techniques. Maya's academic performance had begun to suffer more noticeably during her junior year, as the harassment campaigns became more sophisticated and psychologically damaging. Tyler had discovered that Maya took particular pride in her history assignments, often spending entire weekends researching topics and crafting essays that went far beyond the minimum requirements. He began targeting these projects specifically, timing his interference to cause maximum academic damage while maintaining plausible deniability about his intentions. The most devastating incident had occurred 3 weeks earlier when Maya's research paper on the Chinese Exclusion Act, a topic she had chosen to better understand her own family's immigrant experience, had disappeared from her backpack during lunch period. The 20-page essay had represented weeks of work, including interviews with her grandmother and research at the County Historical Society. When Maya approached Mrs. Patterson about the missing assignment, Tyler had loudly suggested that maybe she had never completed it and was trying to buy extra time, a comment that drew snickers from his friends and skeptical looks from the teacher. Maya had been forced to reconstruct the entire paper from her notes and memory, working through several sleepless nights to produce a shorter version that lacked the depth and nuance of her original work. The replacement essay had earned a B- grade, along with Mrs. Patterson's comment that it seemed rushed and didn't meet Maya's usual standards of excellence. The injustice of receiving a lower grade for Tyler's sabotage had been almost unbearable, but Maya had no way to prove what had happened or seek appropriate redress. The pattern of academic sabotage had continued with increasing frequency and creativity as Tyler's group developed new methods for disrupting Maya's educational success. Her locker combination had been discovered somehow, allowing them to access and damage her materials between classes. Important handouts and assignment sheets would disappear from her folders, forcing her to ask teachers for replacements while Tyler and his friends exchanged knowing looks. Group project partnerships became exercises in humiliation, as other students avoided working with Maya to prevent becoming targets themselves. Maya's grades had dropped from her usual A average to a mixture of B's and C's that threatened her class ranking and potential college scholarship opportunities. Her mother had noticed the declining academic performance and expressed disappointment about Maya's apparent lack of focus and dedication. The conversation had been particularly painful because Maya couldn't explain the real reasons for her struggles without revealing the extent of the harassment she was experiencing and her own feelings of helplessness in addressing it. The social isolation at Lincoln Valley had become so complete that Maya often went entire school days without engaging in meaningful conversation with any of her peers. She had developed strategies for minimizing her visibility and avoiding situations where Tyler's group might target her, but these tactics also prevented her from forming positive relationships or participating in activities that might have enriched her high school experience. Maya ate lunch alone in the library, walked to classes by routes that avoided popular gathering areas, and declined participation in group activities or extracurricular programs where she might encounter her tormentors. The cumulative effect of 3 years of sustained harassment had been a gradual erosion of Maya's self-confidence and sense of personal worth that extended far beyond her school environment. She had begun to internalize some of the negative messages about her appearance, intelligence, and social value that Tyler's group had been broadcasting consistently. Maya found herself avoiding eye contact with strangers, speaking more quietly in all situations, and questioning her own perceptions and judgments about interpersonal interactions. Maya's relationship with her mother had also suffered, as the stress of her school situation made her more withdrawn and irritable at home. Lin Shen had interpreted her daughter's mood changes as typical teenage behavior rather than symptoms of serious problems that required intervention. Their conversations had become shorter and more superficial as Maya learned to deflect questions about her day and redirect discussions toward neutral topics that wouldn't prompt uncomfortable inquiries about her social life or academic challenges. The financial pressures facing Maya's family had intensified during her junior year as competition from chain restaurants and changing consumer preferences had reduced business at Chen's family restaurant. Lin was working longer hours for declining income, a situation that added stress to their household and reduced the time available for mother-daughter communication. Maya had taken on additional responsibilities at home, including grocery shopping, laundry, and basic meal preparation that further limited her available time for homework and studying. Maya's plans for college and her future career had become increasingly uncertain as her grades declined and her confidence eroded. She had originally hoped to pursue pre-med studies with the goal of becoming a physician, a dream that would honor her father's expectations and provide financial security for her family. The combination of lower grades and limited extracurricular involvement had made competitive college admission seem increasingly unlikely, forcing Maya to consider less ambitious alternatives that felt like failures before she had even graduated from high school. The upcoming final project for Mrs. Patterson's Advanced Placement American History class represented Maya's last opportunity to demonstrate her academic capabilities and potentially salvage her grade in what had been her strongest subject. The assignment required students to research and present a comprehensive analysis of a significant historical event or movement, complete with primary source documentation and original interpretation of the evidence. Maya had chosen to focus on the 1943 Zoot Suit riots in Los Angeles, a topic that allowed her to explore themes of racial prejudice, cultural identity, and social justice that resonated with her own experiences. Maya had spent the previous month conducting extensive research for her project, visiting the university library to access academic databases and historical archives that weren't available through the high school's limited resources. She had interviewed elderly community members who remembered the events, gathered photographs and newspaper articles from the time period, and developed an original thesis about how the riots reflected broader patterns of discrimination against minority communities during wartime. The project represented some of her best academic work, and her last chance to prove to herself and her teachers that she deserved recognition for her intellectual abilities. The 25-page research paper that would accompany Maya's presentation had been carefully crafted over weeks of writing and revision, incorporating feedback from her mother's review of early drafts and suggestions from librarians who had helped her locate primary sources. Maya had printed the final version on high-quality paper and bound it in a professional presentation folder that had cost her 2 weeks of lunch money but seemed worth the expense for such an important assignment. She had also prepared detailed note cards, visual aids, and a bibliography that demonstrated the depth and rigor of her research process. Maya's presentation was scheduled for the following Friday, and she had been practicing her delivery during her evening study sessions and martial arts training breaks. She had memorized key points and statistics, prepared for potential questions from classmates and teachers, and organized her materials for maximum impact during the 15-minute presentation period. The project represented not only her academic work, but also her opportunity to share knowledge about an important historical event that most of her classmates had never studied. The weight of expectation surrounding this final project had added additional stress to Maya's already difficult daily routine at Lincoln Valley High School. She had become even more vigilant about protecting her materials from Tyler's sabotage attempts, keeping her research papers in her locked locker except when she needed them for specific classes. Maya had also varied her daily schedule and routes through the school building to make it harder for Tyler's group to predict her location and plan their harassment activities. Maya's martial arts training had become an even more important refuge during the weeks leading up to her presentation, as the stress of protecting her project combined with her usual anxiety about daily survival at school. Master Kim had noticed her increased focus and intensity during practice sessions, observing that she seemed to be channeling significant emotional energy into her techniques. Her kicks had become more powerful, her forms more precise, and her sparring more aggressive as she worked through feelings that she couldn't express in any other context. The irony of Maya's situation was not lost on her during quiet moments of reflection about her life and circumstances. She possessed the physical skills and mental discipline to end Tyler's harassment decisively and immediately, yet she continued to endure daily humiliation and academic sabotage because of her commitment to the principles that Master Kim had taught her about appropriate use of martial arts techniques. Maya understood that revealing her capabilities would fundamentally change the dynamics of her situation, but she had been trained to view physical confrontation as a last resort to be avoided whenever possible. Maya's internal struggle between her desire for justice and her commitment to non-violence had become more intense as Tyler's harassment escalated and began affecting her academic future. She had begun questioning whether her interpretation of Master Kim's teachings was too restrictive, whether psychological torture deserved the same protection from physical response as mere verbal teasing. The approaching deadline for her history presentation had heightened these internal debates, as Maya realized that Tyler was likely planning something significant to disrupt her final opportunity for academic redemption. The transformation that was building within Maya remained invisible to her classmates, teachers, and even her mother. But it was becoming increasingly difficult for her to maintain the facade of helpless victimhood that had protected her secret for so long. 3 years of accumulated anger, frustration, and injustice had created a reservoir of emotional energy that was seeking an outlet, while 6 years of martial arts training had provided her with the tools to channel that energy into devastatingly effective action when the moment finally arrived. As Maya walked through the hallways of Lincoln Valley High School on what would prove to be the last normal day of her junior year, she carried within her petite frame the power to revolutionize the social order that had oppressed her for so long. The final history project tucked safely in her locker represented more than just an academic assignment. It was her last hope for proving her worth in a system that had consistently dismissed and devalued her contributions. What Maya didn't know was that Tyler Brooks had been planning the most humiliating and destructive attack of his 3-year campaign against her, an attack that would finally push her past the breaking point and unleash the warrior that had been quietly developing in the shadows of her seemingly powerless existence. The morning of Tuesday, October 17th, arrived with an unseasonable warmth that made Maya's thick cardigan feel stifling as she navigated the crowded hallways of Lincoln Valley High School. She clutched her backpack straps tighter than usual, hyper-aware of the precious cargo contained within her locker just 30 feet away. Her final history project represented weeks of meticulous research and her last opportunity to salvage her academic standing before college applications became due in 2 months. Maya had arrived at school 20 minutes early to review her presentation notes one final time before first period. But as she approached her locker, she noticed Tyler Brooks and his crew gathered near the water fountain with an energy that made her stomach clench with familiar dread. Jake Morrison was gesturing animatedly while Marcus Webb and Ryan Foster listened with the kind of intense attention that preceded their most elaborate harassment schemes. Tyler stood slightly apart from the group, his arms crossed, and his expression carrying the cold calculation that Maya had learned to fear above all else. The first sign that this Tuesday would be different from their usual patterns of intimidation came during second-period English class, when Mrs. Rodriguez announced that students would be presenting their independent reading projects throughout the week. Maya had prepared a presentation on Amy Tan's The Joy Luck Club, a choice that allowed her to explore themes of immigrant identity and generational trauma that resonated with her own family experience. As she gathered her materials at the end of class, Tyler brushed past her desk with unnecessary force, causing her carefully arranged note cards to scatter across the floor. Maya knelt to collect her scattered notes while other students filed out of the classroom, but Tyler had already disappeared into the hallway by the time she looked up. The incident seemed relatively minor compared to his usual tactics, but Maya noticed that several of her most important note cards were missing when she reorganized her materials. The cards contained key quotes and page references that she would need for her presentation, forcing her to spend her lunch period in the library reconstructing her notes from memory and hoping she could recall the specific details accurately. The escalation continued during third-period chemistry lab when Maya discovered that someone had tampered with her experimental setup, introducing contaminants that would make it impossible to achieve the expected results. Dr. Hansen had emphasized repeatedly that lab grades were calculated based on both procedure and outcomes, meaning that Maya would receive a significantly lower score despite following all protocols correctly. As she worked frantically to identify and correct the sabotage, she could hear Tyler's group whispering and snickering from their lab station across the room. Maya approached Dr. Hansen after class to explain what had happened, but the teacher's response reflected the same dismissive attitude that most faculty members had adopted toward complaints involving Tyler's group. Dr. Hansen suggested that Maya might have made procedural errors despite her confidence, noting that contamination typically resulted from careless technique rather than deliberate interference. The implication that Maya was either incompetent or lying made her cheeks burn with humiliation as she gathered her materials and headed toward her next class. The pattern of minor harassments and academic sabotage continued throughout the morning, each incident carefully calibrated to appear accidental, while cumulatively creating an atmosphere of psychological pressure that left Maya feeling increasingly vulnerable and isolated. Her pencils disappeared from her desk during calculus class, forcing her to borrow supplies from reluctant classmates who avoided eye contact while helping her. Her gym locker was found open after physical education, with her street clothes scattered across the floor in a way that suggested deliberate searching rather than simple vandalism. Maya's anxiety reached new levels during lunch period, when she noticed Tyler's group huddled around a smartphone, taking turns looking at the screen and reacting with expressions of malicious delight. Their behavior suggested they were planning something significant, but Maya couldn't determine what they might be targeting or when they intended to strike. She spent the entire lunch period in the library, too nervous to eat the sandwich her mother had packed, and too distracted to focus on the homework assignments she had brought to occupy her time. The afternoon brought a temporary respite from harassment as Maya attended her Advanced Placement American History class, the one environment where she still felt confident and intellectually engaged, despite the stress affecting other areas of her academic performance. Mrs. Patterson had created a classroom culture that emphasized rigorous discussion and critical thinking, making it more difficult for Tyler to disrupt the learning environment without facing consequences from a teacher who valued academic excellence above social hierarchy. Maya had been looking forward to this class all day because Mrs. Patterson had promised to return their research proposal drafts with feedback that would help students refine their final projects. Maya's proposal on the Zoot Suit riots had been carefully crafted to demonstrate both historical significance and personal connection to the material, and she was eager to learn whether her approach met Mrs. Patterson's expectations for scholarly rigor and original analysis. When Mrs. Patterson distributed the graded proposals, Maya was thrilled to discover that her work had received an A- grade, along with extensive written feedback, praising her research methodology and suggesting additional primary sources that might strengthen her analysis. The teacher had written a particularly encouraging note about Maya's thesis statement, commenting that her interpretation of the riots as a reflection of broader wartime anxieties about cultural identity showed sophisticated historical thinking that belonged in graduate-level coursework. The positive feedback on her proposal gave Maya a surge of confidence that carried through the remainder of the school day, reminding her why she had originally fallen in love with historical research and academic writing. For the first time in weeks, She felt optimistic about her chances of producing a final project that would demonstrate her intellectual capabilities and potentially help her recover from the declining grades that had characterized her junior year. Maya began mentally rehearsing her presentation and considering ways to incorporate Mrs. Patterson's suggestions into her final research paper. Maya's improved mood made her less vigilant about avoiding Tyler's group as she moved through the hallways between classes, a relaxation of her usual defensive posture that she would later recognize as a critical mistake. As she stopped at her locker to retrieve materials for her final class of the day, she was surprised to find Tyler Brooks standing nearby with an expression that seemed almost friendly compared to his usual hostility. His casual demeanor immediately put Maya on high alert, as she had learned that Tyler was most dangerous when he appeared least threatening. Tyler approached Maya's locker with his hands in his pockets and a smile that didn't reach his eyes, positioning himself close enough to make private conversation possible while maintaining the appearance of casual interaction to anyone observing from a distance. His opening comment caught Maya completely off guard as he complimented her performance in Mrs. Patterson's class and expressed interest in her research topic, questions that seemed genuinely curious rather than mocking or sarcastic. Maya found herself responding cautiously to Tyler's apparent interest, explaining her research methodology and sharing some of the insights she had gained about the historical significance of the Zoot Suit riots. Tyler listened attentively and asked follow-up questions that demonstrated he had been paying attention during class discussions, creating a surreal experience for Maya, who had never engaged in academic conversation with her primary tormentor. His knowledge of historical details and analytical frameworks suggested that Tyler possessed intellectual capabilities that he typically concealed beneath his persona of athletic superiority and social dominance. The conversation continued for several minutes, as other students moved through the hallways preparing for final period classes, and Maya began to wonder whether Tyler might be attempting some form of reconciliation or truce that would allow them to coexist peacefully during their remaining time at Lincoln Valley High School. His questions about her research sources and analytical approach seemed genuinely scholarly, and he even offered suggestions about additional perspectives she might consider, including in her final presentation. Maya's cautious optimism about Tyler's apparent change in attitude was shattered when he asked specifically about her research materials and where she kept them stored, questions that immediately triggered her defensive instincts and reminded her that Tyler had never shown interest in anything except finding new ways to torment her. She provided vague responses about using multiple sources and keeping materials in various locations, but Tyler pressed for more specific information about her organizational system and storage methods. The true purpose of Tyler's friendly conversation became clear when he casually mentioned that he had heard Maya was planning to present her project on Friday and wondered whether she might be willing to share her research with other students who were struggling with their own topics. His suggestion that she could help her classmates by providing copies of her materials was presented as an opportunity for academic collaboration, but Maya recognized it as an attempt to gain access to her work for purposes that had nothing to do with legitimate scholarship. Maya politely declined Tyler's request and excused herself to attend her final class, but the encounter left her feeling deeply unsettled about his motivations and concerned about potential threats to her project materials. She spent the remainder of the afternoon replaying their conversation and analyzing his questions for clues about what he might be planning, but Tyler's apparent sincerity had been convincing enough to make her question her own suspicions about his intentions. That evening, Maya's anxiety about Tyler's unexpected interest in her project prompted her to take additional security measures that she hoped would protect her materials from any sabotage attempts he might be planning. She created backup copies of her most important documents and stored them in multiple locations, including her home computer, a flash drive hidden in her bedroom, and printed copies locked in a filing cabinet at her mother's restaurant. Maya also moved her original research materials from her school locker to her backpack, reasoning that keeping them with her at all times would make it impossible for Tyler to access them during school hours. Maya's martial arts training that evening reflected her heightened state of anxiety and frustration as she channeled her nervous energy into more aggressive techniques and longer practice sessions. Master Kim noticed her increased intensity during forms practice and sparring exercises, observing that she seemed to be working through emotional challenges that were affecting her focus and technique. He offered gentle guidance about maintaining mental clarity during stressful periods and reminded her that true martial arts mastery required emotional balance as well as physical skill. The conversation with Master Kim about emotional control sparked an internal debate within Maya about whether she was handling her situation at school appropriately or allowing Tyler's harassment to continue unnecessarily through her commitment to nonviolence. She found herself questioning whether psychological torture deserved the same restraint that she would show towards simple verbal teasing, and whether her interpretation of martial arts philosophy was preventing her from protecting herself effectively against systematic abuse. Maya returned home that evening feeling emotionally drained from her training session and the ongoing stress of navigating Tyler's increasingly sophisticated harassment campaigns. She spent several hours reviewing her project materials and adding final touches to her presentation, but her concentration was repeatedly interrupted by intrusive thoughts about Tyler's conversation and speculation about what he might be planning for the remainder of the week. Wednesday morning brought an escalation in harassment intensity that confirmed Maya's worst fears about Tyler's intentions and demonstrated that his friendly conversation had been reconnaissance for a more elaborate attack. Maya arrived at school to discover that rumors about her family's financial difficulties and her mother's work schedule had spread throughout her peer group, information that could only have come from someone who had been investigating her personal circumstances with malicious intent. The rumors were carefully crafted to maximize embarrassment while remaining technically accurate, focusing on details like Maya's reliance on free lunch programs, her mother's long work hours at the restaurant, and their family's modest living situation above the commercial space. Tyler's group had apparently spent considerable time gathering information about Maya's home life and presenting it in ways that reinforced stereotypes about poor Asian families and their supposed inability to integrate successfully into American communities. Maya discovered the extent of the rumor campaign during first-period mathematics class when she overheard Jennifer Walsh and Sarah Martinez discussing her family's circumstances with a mixture of pity and disdain that made her stomach churn with humiliation. Their conversation included details about her mother's work schedule that Maya had never shared with anyone at school, suggesting that Tyler had found ways to gather intelligence about her personal life through methods she couldn't identify or counter. The psychological impact of having her private family's circumstances become public knowledge was devastating for Maya's sense of security and control over her own narrative. She had worked hard to maintain boundaries between her school life and home situation, partly to protect her mother from potential discrimination, and partly to preserve some element of privacy in her increasingly exposed existence at Lincoln Valley High School. Tyler's decision to weaponize her family's economic struggles represented a new level of cruelty that made her previous harassment seem almost benign by comparison. Maya's concentration during morning classes was severely compromised by her anxiety about what other personal information Tyler might have discovered and how he intended to use it against her. She found herself constantly scanning the hallways for signs of his group's activities and analyzing conversations around her for references to her family or living situation. The hypervigilance required to monitor potential threats exhausted her mentally and made it impossible to focus on academic material that required sustained attention and analysis. The harassment campaign intensified during lunch period when Maya discovered that someone had created a social media account using her name and personal information to post embarrassing content that portrayed her as desperate for attention and resentful of her classmates' advantages. The fake posts included references to her family's financial struggles and bitter complaints about the unfairness of American society, content designed to make her appear ungrateful and politically radical in ways that would alienate potential supporters. Maya spent her lunch period in the computer lab trying to report the fake account and have the offensive content removed, but the social media platform's response time and verification requirements meant that the damaging posts would remain visible for several days while her request was processed. Meanwhile, screenshots of the fake posts were being shared among her classmates, creating a viral spread of defamatory content that would be impossible to contain or correct completely. The afternoon brought additional revelations about the scope of Tyler's intelligence gathering, as Maya discovered that someone had been following her after school and documenting her activities at Master Kim's Taekwondo studio. A photograph posted on the fake social media account showed Maya entering the martial arts academy, accompanied by mocking comments about Asian stereotypes and suggestions that she was planning to use violence against her classmates who had supposedly mistreated her. Maya was horrified to realize that Tyler's surveillance had extended to her most private refuge and the one aspect of her life that had remained completely separate from her school troubles. The photograph suggested that Tyler or his associates had been watching her carefully enough to learn her schedule and follow her to locations that should have been safe from their harassment. The invasion of privacy felt like a violation that went far beyond typical teenage bullying into territory that seemed genuinely threatening and potentially dangerous. Maya's discovery of the surveillance triggered a wave of paranoia that made her question the security of every aspect of her daily routine and wonder what other private information Tyler might have gathered about her family, activities, and vulnerabilities. She began mentally reviewing her recent activities and conversations for any details that could be used against her, while simultaneously trying to assess whether Tyler's escalating behavior represented a genuine threat to her physical safety rather than merely her psychological well-being. The revelation that Tyler knew about her martial arts training created a complex set of concerns for Maya about how this information might affect their ongoing conflict and whether he might interpret her skills as a threat that required preemptive action. She worried that Tyler might attempt to discredit her by spreading rumors about her violent intentions, or that he might escalate his own tactics in response to perceived threats from her training. The secrecy that had protected her skills for so long had been compromised, fundamentally changing the dynamics of their relationship. Maya's evening training session at Master Kim's academy was disrupted by her anxiety about the surveillance and her concern about potentially bringing danger to the studio through Tyler's continued harassment. She found herself constantly glancing toward the windows and entrance, unable to concentrate fully on her techniques because of intrusive thoughts about who might be watching and what they might be planning. Master Kim noticed her distraction and asked gentle questions about her state of mind, but Maya was reluctant to burden him with details about her school troubles. Thursday morning brought the most direct confrontation yet as Tyler approached Maya's locker with his full crew in attendance, abandoning any pretense of subtlety or deniability in favor of open intimidation designed to terrorize her into submission. His opening statement made it clear that he was aware of her martial arts training and considered it a threat that needed to be addressed before she might decide to use her skills against him or his friends. Tyler's knowledge of her training created a surreal conversation where he alternated between mocking her perceived attempts to become dangerous and warning her about the consequences of any aggressive action she might consider taking against him. He made specific references to techniques and belt rankings that demonstrated someone had been gathering detailed information about her progress at Master Kim's academy, possibly through direct observation or conversations with other students who attended the studio. The implied threats in Tyler's comments about her martial arts training were more sophisticated than his previous harassment, suggesting that he understood the legal and social consequences she would face if she were to use physical force against him regardless of his own behavior. Tyler made it clear that any violence on her part would be reported immediately to school administrators and law enforcement, while his own psychological torture would continue to enjoy the protection of plausible deniability and social privilege. Maya's response to Tyler's confrontation was carefully controlled as she drew upon her martial arts training to remain calm and avoid escalating the situation through emotional reactions that might provide him with additional ammunition for his harassment campaign. She neither confirmed nor denied his knowledge about her training, instead maintaining the neutral expression and steady voice that Master Kim had taught her to use during stressful encounters with aggressive individuals. The conversation ended when Tyler made a specific threat about Maya's upcoming history presentation, stating that he looked forward to Friday's class and suggesting that her project might not proceed as smoothly as she had planned. His words carried implications that made Maya's blood run cold as she realized that he was planning something significant for her most important academic moment, the presentation that represented her last opportunity to demonstrate her intellectual capabilities and salvage her academic standing. Maya spent Thursday afternoon in a state of high anxiety as she tried to anticipate what Tyler might be planning for her presentation and develop strategies for protecting her project materials and ensuring her ability to complete the assignment successfully. She considered various scenarios including technical sabotage, deliberate disruption during her presentation, or theft of her materials immediately before she was scheduled to present, but Tyler's creativity in developing new forms of harassment made it impossible to predict his specific approach. The anticipation of Tyler's planned attack on her presentation created a paradoxical situation where Maya found herself almost hoping that he would finally cross the line into behavior that would justify a physical response and allow her to use the skills she had been developing for 6 years. The thought of finally being able to defend herself actively rather than passively enduring his abuse was both terrifying and exhilarating, representing a fundamental shift in her mental approach to their ongoing conflict. Maya's final training session before her presentation was the most intense of her entire martial arts career, as she channeled years of accumulated frustration and anger into techniques that reflected her growing readiness to abandon her defensive posture in favor of active resistance. Master Kim observed her training with concern and pride, recognizing that his student had reached a level of physical and mental preparation that suggested significant challenges ahead, but trusting that her character and training would guide her toward appropriate responses to whatever difficulties she might face. Friday morning arrived with an atmosphere of anticipation that seemed to permeate the entire school as word had spread about the potential for drama during Mrs. Patterson's Advanced Placement American History presentations. Maya arrived early to make final preparations for her presentation, but she could sense the unusual energy in the hallways as students gathered in clusters to discuss rumors about planned disruptions and potential confrontations during the day's academic presentations. Maya's presentation was scheduled for third period, giving her the entire morning to worry about Tyler's planned sabotage and wonder whether she would be able to complete her project successfully or would face another humiliating defeat that would damage her academic standing and personal confidence. She spent first and second periods checking and rechecking her materials while monitoring Tyler's group for signs of their intentions, but their behavior remained normal enough to provide no clear warnings about when or how they intended to strike. The moment of truth arrived when Maya entered Mrs. Patterson's classroom for third period and discovered that Tyler and his entire crew had arranged to attend the presentation, despite not being enrolled in the advanced placement course. Their presence in the classroom was explained as educational interest in historical topics, but Maya immediately understood that they were there to witness and possibly participate in whatever humiliation Tyler had planned for her most important academic moment. Mrs. Patterson welcomed the visiting students and praised their interest in historical learning, apparently unaware that their attendance was motivated by malicious intent rather than genuine scholarly curiosity. Maya took her seat and began organizing her presentation materials while fighting waves of nausea and anxiety about performing in front of the people who had made her life miserable for 3 years. The other student presentations proceeded normally, with Maya barely able to concentrate on her classmates' work because of her preoccupation with Tyler's presence and her anticipation of whatever attack he had planned. When Mrs. Patterson finally called her name and invited her to begin her presentation on the Zoot Suit riots, Maya approached the front of the classroom on unsteady legs while clutching her carefully prepared materials and hoping that her voice would remain strong enough to deliver her presentation effectively. Maya's presentation began smoothly as she introduced her topic and outlined the historical context of the Zoot Suit riots, drawing upon weeks of research to provide background information about wartime tensions and cultural conflicts in 1940s Los Angeles. Her confidence grew as she settled into the familiar rhythm of academic presentation and began sharing the insights and analysis that she had developed through her extensive research process. The attack came without warning during the middle of Maya's presentation when Tyler stood up and interrupted her with a loud comment about the relevance of historical riots to contemporary social problems, framing his disruption as legitimate academic inquiry while actually derailing her carefully planned presentation. His question was designed to force Maya into political territory that would make her appear radical and potentially offensive to conservative members of her audience. Maya attempted to redirect the conversation back to historical analysis, but Tyler continued his interruption with additional questions and comments that gradually shifted the focus away from her research and toward contemporary political debates that had nothing to do with her actual topic. Other students began joining the discussion with their own questions and opinions, creating a chaotic atmosphere that made it impossible for Maya to complete her presentation as planned. Mrs. Patterson eventually restored order to the classroom and allowed Maya to continue her presentation, but the damage had been done as her carefully rehearsed delivery had been disrupted and her time allocation had been thrown off by the unexpected interruptions. Maya struggled to regain her composure and cover her remaining material effectively, but she could see disappointment in Mrs. Patterson's expression and knew that her presentation had failed to demonstrate the quality of her research and analysis. The final blow came as Maya was concluding her presentation and preparing to distribute copies of her research paper to the class for their review and feedback. Tyler stood up again and made a show of examining her materials with exaggerated interest, before loudly commenting that her research seemed heavily biased toward one particular perspective and might not meet the standards of objectivity that Mrs. Patterson required for advanced placement coursework. Tyler's critique was delivered with enough academic vocabulary and apparent sincerity to sound like legitimate scholarly criticism rather than personal attack, making it difficult for Mrs. Patterson to intervene without appearing to stifle academic discussion. Other students began nodding in agreement with Tyler's assessment, creating a momentum of criticism that overwhelmed Maya's attempts to defend her research methodology and analytical approach. Maya felt her 3 years of accumulated anger and frustration reaching a boiling point as she watched Tyler systematically destroy her academic reputation and credibility in front of the teacher whose opinion mattered most to her educational future. The injustice of being criticized for biased research by someone who had never demonstrated any genuine interest in historical scholarship was almost unbearable, but Maya forced herself to maintain composure and respond professionally to the criticism while internally planning her revenge against Tyler's long campaign of harassment and sabotage. The presentation period ended with Mrs. Patterson thanking Maya for her work and suggesting that she consider revising her analysis to address some of the concerns that had been raised during the discussion, comments that felt like a devastating rejection of months of careful research and preparation. Maya gathered her materials and returned to her seat while Tyler's group exchanged satisfied looks and whispered comments about the success of their disruption. Maya's humiliation was compounded by the knowledge that her poor presentation performance would likely result in a significantly lower grade for her most important assignment, potentially damaging her final grade in Advanced Placement American History and reducing her chances for college admission and scholarship opportunities. The academic consequences of Tyler's sabotage felt even more devastating than the social humiliation because they threatened the educational achievements that represented her primary path toward future success and independence. The remainder of Friday passed in a blur of classes and activities that Maya barely registered as she struggled to process the magnitude of her defeat and consider her options for responding to Tyler's latest attack. She found herself cycling between despair about her academic future and rage about the injustice of her situation, emotions that were building toward a breaking point that she could feel approaching despite her attempts to maintain control and perspective. Maya's weekend was consumed by efforts to salvage her history grade through additional research and revision of her project, but she struggled to concentrate on academic work while processing the humiliation of Friday's presentation and anticipating whatever new attacks Tyler might be planning for the following week. Her mother noticed her distress and attempted to offer support and encouragement, but Maya was reluctant to explain the full extent of her troubles at school or burden her mother with problems that seemed to have no solution. Maya's Saturday training session at Master Kim's academy provided temporary relief from her academic stress, but she found herself working through techniques with unusual aggression and intensity that reflected her growing readiness to abandon her passive approach to Tyler's harassment. Master Kim observed her emotional state with concern and offered guidance about channeling anger into productive training rather than allowing it to consume her mental clarity and emotional balance. The conversation with Master Kim about anger management sparked Maya's recognition that she had reached a critical decision point where she would either need to find ways to address Tyler's harassment more actively or accept continued defeat and humiliation that would ultimately destroy her academic future and personal confidence. The traditional martial arts emphasis on avoiding conflict seemed increasingly inadequate for dealing with systematic psychological warfare that was designed to exploit her commitment to nonviolence. Sunday evening brought Maya's final preparation for what she sensed would be a decisive week in her ongoing conflict with Tyler, as his escalating tactics and her growing anger seemed to be building toward a confrontation that would fundamentally change their relationship and possibly her entire experience at Lincoln Valley High School. She spent hours reviewing her remaining assignments and planning strategies for protecting her academic work while simultaneously preparing mentally for the possibility that she might finally need to use her martial arts training in ways that Master Kim had taught her to avoid. Maya's internal transformation from passive victim to potential active resistance fighter was accompanied by a growing sense of clarity about her situation and her options that replaced the confusion and helplessness that had characterized her previous responses to Tyler's harassment. For the first time in 3 years, she began to feel like she possessed some degree of agency and control over her circumstances, even though she understood that exercising that control would require crossing lines that she had never imagined she would need to cross. The weekend ended with Maya feeling more determined and focused than she had experienced since the beginning of Tyler's harassment campaign, but also more dangerous than she had ever allowed herself to become during her years of martial arts training. The shy girl who had endured 3 years of systematic abuse was preparing to transform into someone who would no longer accept defeat and humiliation as inevitable consequences of her social position and physical appearance. Monday morning arrived with Maya feeling a strange sense of calm that surprised her after the turmoil of the previous week. She had spent Sunday evening making a decision that felt both terrifying and liberating, accepting that her strategy of passive endurance had failed completely, and that Tyler's escalating harassment would continue until she found the courage to respond with equal force. The transformation wasn't sudden, but rather the culmination of months of internal debate about the appropriate limits of nonviolence when facing systematic psychological warfare designed to destroy her future. Maya arrived at school carrying herself differently, with straighter posture and steadier eye contact that reflected her new mental state. She had chosen her clothing more carefully than usual, selecting fitted jeans and a form-fitting sweater that allowed for greater freedom of movement while still maintaining her carefully cultivated image of academic seriousness. Her backpack felt lighter despite containing the same materials because she was no longer burdened by the constant anxiety about protecting her possessions from Tyler's sabotage attempts. The first sign that Tyler had noticed Maya's changed demeanor came during second period when he approached her locker with his usual swagger but seemed taken aback by her direct gaze and confident posture. Maya no longer averted her eyes or hunched her shoulders defensively when he appeared, instead maintaining steady eye contact that seemed to unnerve him, despite his attempts to project dominance through physical intimidation. Their brief exchange was superficially similar to hundreds of previous encounters, but Tyler walked away with a puzzled expression that suggested he sensed something different about her attitude. Maya's newfound confidence extended to her classroom participation as she began speaking up during discussions and asking questions that demonstrated her intellectual engagement with the material. Teachers who had grown accustomed to her silent presence seemed pleasantly surprised by her more active participation, while classmates began noticing her contributions to academic conversations. The change was subtle but significant, representing Maya's decision to reclaim her identity as a serious student regardless of Tyler's attempts to undermine her academic credibility. The week progressed with an undercurrent of tension as Maya continued displaying her new confidence, while Tyler's group struggled to understand why their usual intimidation tactics were no longer producing the desired effects. Maya had stopped flinching when they approached her locker, no longer hurried through hallways to avoid encounters, and responded to their taunts with calm silence rather than visible distress. The psychological dynamic that had sustained their harassment campaign for 3 years was shifting in ways that left Tyler feeling confused and increasingly frustrated. Wednesday brought the incident that would finally push their conflict beyond the point of no return, when Tyler decided to escalate his tactics in response to Maya's apparent immunity to his psychological pressure. Maya had been working on a new research paper during her lunch period in the library, spreading her materials across a large table near the windows where natural light made reading easier. Her notes, draft pages, and source materials represented weeks of work on a project about Japanese-American internment during World War II, a topic that allowed her to explore themes of racial prejudice and government overreach that resonated with her understanding of systematic injustice. Tyler's approach to the library table appeared casual and accidental, as if he were simply looking for a place to sit while studying with his friends during their lunch break. Maya immediately recognized the threat but made no move to gather her materials or abandon her workspace, instead continuing to read and take notes while monitoring Tyler's movements through her peripheral vision. The standoff lasted several minutes as Tyler clearly expected Maya to retreat in response to his presence, but her refusal to be intimidated seemed to anger him in ways that his previous victories had not. The confrontation began when Tyler loudly commented on Maya's research topic, suggesting that studying historical examples of racial discrimination was probably motivated by personal resentment rather than genuine academic interest. His voice carried across the normally quiet library, drawing attention from other students and the librarian, while framing Maya's scholarly work as evidence of political bias and emotional instability. Maya continued working without responding, but Tyler interpreted her silence as weakness rather than strategic restraint. Tyler's criticism escalated to include mocking comments about Maya's family history and speculation about whether her ancestors had faced similar misunderstandings during their immigration to America. His words were carefully chosen to appear like legitimate historical discussion while actually constituting personal attacks designed to humiliate Maya and provoke an emotional response that would justify further harassment. Other students in the library began watching the interaction with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort, recognizing the cruelty beneath Tyler's academic vocabulary. Maya's breaking point came when Tyler reached across the table and began examining her research materials without permission, making loud observations about her sources and methodology that were designed to discredit her work in front of witnesses. When he picked up her draft pages and began reading them aloud with exaggerated criticism, Maya finally spoke with a voice that carried unmistakable authority despite its quiet tone. She told Tyler to put down her papers and leave her workspace immediately, using a commanding presence that surprised everyone within hearing distance. Tyler's response revealed that Maya's show of backbone had genuinely rattled his confidence, as he overreacted to her simple request by becoming more aggressive and physically intimidating. He refused to return her papers and instead stood up to tower over her seated position, using his height advantage to create a sense of physical threat while continuing to mock her research and academic abilities. His behavior crossed clearly into harassment territory that even sympathetic observers could not dismiss as playful teasing or academic discussion. Maya stood up slowly and deliberately, her movements controlled and purposeful in ways that demonstrated her martial arts training to anyone who understood body mechanics and balance. She repeated her request for Tyler to return her materials, but her tone had shifted to something that made nearby students step back instinctively despite not understanding why they suddenly felt nervous. Tyler seemed oblivious to the danger signs, interpreting Maya's calm demeanor as continued weakness rather than the controlled preparation that preceded devastating action. The library confrontation ended when Mrs. Walsh, the head librarian, intervened to restore quiet and order to her domain. Tyler returned Maya's papers with exaggerated courtesy while making comments about sensitive people who couldn't handle academic criticism, but his forced cheerfulness couldn't disguise his frustration with Maya's refusal to be intimidated. Maya gathered her materials calmly and efficiently, but Tyler noticed that her hands were perfectly steady despite the stress of their confrontation, a detail that should have warned him about her level of training and self-control. Maya's response to the library incident marked a fundamental shift in her mental approach to Tyler's harassment, as she finally acknowledged that passive resistance had failed completely, and that more direct action would be necessary to protect herself and her academic future. That evening's training session at Master Kim's academy reflected her new mindset as she practiced techniques with focused intensity, while mentally preparing for the possibility that she might need to use her skills in real confrontation rather than controlled sparring situations. Master Kim observed Maya's training with growing concern and pride, recognizing that his student had reached a level of mental and physical preparation that suggested significant challenges ahead. During their conversation after class, Maya asked specific questions about self-defense applications and legal considerations that confirmed his suspicions about trouble in her personal life. Master Kim provided guidance about appropriate responses to different levels of threat while emphasizing that martial arts skills should never be used for revenge or aggression, only for protection when no other options remained. Thursday's escalation came during Maya's advanced placement American history class when Tyler arrived with what appeared to be additional research about the Zoot Suit riots that he wanted to share with Mrs. Patterson and the other students. His presentation of new evidence and alternative interpretations was framed as scholarly contribution rather than personal attack, but Maya immediately recognized it as sophisticated sabotage designed to undermine her credibility and academic standing through apparently legitimate academic means. Tyler's supposed research included sources and perspectives that directly contradicted Maya's analysis and conclusions, presented with enough academic sophistication to appear credible to observers who had not spent weeks studying the topic in depth. His criticism was delivered with false humility and apparent respect for Maya's efforts, making it difficult for Mrs. Patterson to recognize the personal animosity behind his scholarly facade. The effect was to cast doubt on Maya's research methodology and historical interpretation, while positioning Tyler as a more thorough and objective scholar. Maya's attempt to defend her research and respond to Tyler's criticism was hampered by the classroom setting and academic expectations that prevented her from addressing the personal nature of his attack. Mrs. Patterson encouraged scholarly debate and discussion, apparently unaware that Tyler's questions were motivated by malice rather than genuine intellectual curiosity. Maya found herself forced to defend work that she knew was solid, while appearing defensive and emotional in response to criticism that seemed reasonable to outside observers. The academic ambush continued after class when Tyler approached Maya with apparent concern about the quality of her historical research and offered to help her find better sources and develop more balanced analysis. His false friendliness was designed to humiliate Maya by positioning himself as academically superior, while maintaining plausible deniability about his hostile intentions. Maya recognized the manipulation, but struggled to respond effectively without appearing paranoid or ungrateful for his supposed assistance. Maya's frustration with Tyler's sophisticated psychological warfare reached new levels, as she realized that his tactics had evolved beyond simple bullying into systematic undermining of her academic credibility and intellectual confidence. His ability to weaponize scholarly discussion and academic standards against her represented a level of strategic thinking that made him more dangerous than typical teenage bullies who relied on obvious intimidation and physical threats. Maya began to understand that defeating Tyler would require not just physical courage, but also strategic intelligence and careful planning. Friday arrived with Maya sensing that Tyler was building towards something significant, as his behavior throughout the week had suggested increasing frustration with her refusal to be intimidated, combined with growing determination to reassert his dominance through more dramatic means. Maya's awareness of impending confrontation was heightened by her martial arts training, which had taught her to recognize the subtle signs of escalating aggression and prepare for defensive action before attacks became unavoidable. Maya's premonition proved accurate during lunch period when she discovered Tyler and his entire crew gathered around her usual study table in the library, apparently engaged in their own research project that coincidentally required the exact space where Maya always worked. Their occupation of her territory was clearly intentional and designed to force another confrontation, but Maya approached the situation with calm determination rather than her previous anxiety about avoiding conflict. Tyler's greeting was superficially friendly as he expressed surprise at finding Maya in the library and offered to share the large table for their respective projects. His apparent generosity was undermined by the smirks and knowing looks exchanged among his friends, making it clear that Maya was walking into a carefully planned trap. Maya accepted Tyler's offer with polite thanks while mentally preparing for whatever humiliation they had devised for her entertainment. The setup became apparent when Maya spread her materials on the table and began working on her latest assignment, only to discover that Tyler's group had strategically positioned themselves to monitor and comment on her every action. Their observations were framed as friendly interest and academic curiosity, but the constant attention made it impossible for Maya to concentrate on her work while they analyzed and criticized her research methods, source selection, and writing style with apparent scholarly seriousness. Maya's patience with their psychological torture lasted exactly 23 minutes before she calmly gathered her materials and informed Tyler that she would be finding another workspace where she could study without distraction. Her polite but firm response should have ended the encounter peacefully, but Tyler interpreted her attempt to leave as a retreat that validated his dominance and encouraged him to press his advantage through more aggressive tactics. Tyler's escalation began with his suggestion that Maya's inability to work collaboratively with other students reflected the kind of antisocial tendencies that might explain her academic focus and social isolation. His psychological analysis was delivered with false concern about her mental health and social development, creating a framework where Maya's reasonable desire for privacy became evidence of personality disorders that justified their intervention and assistance. Maya's response was controlled and professional as she thanked Tyler for his concern, while explaining that she preferred quiet environments for concentration and would be happy to collaborate with him on actual group assignments when such opportunities arose. Her diplomatic answer should have diffused the situation, but Tyler seemed energized by her continued composure and determined to provoke an emotional reaction that would justify more aggressive harassment. The attack that finally triggered Maya's transformation came when Tyler stood up and blocked her path from the table, using his physical size to prevent her from leaving while maintaining the appearance of friendly conversation to outside observers. His positioning was carefully calculated to create a sense of physical threat and confinement, while remaining subtle enough to avoid intervention from the librarian or other students who might not recognize his behavior as harassment. Maya's request for Tyler to step aside and allow her to pass was delivered with quiet authority that should have warned him about her level of training and self-control, but Tyler misinterpreted her calm demeanor as continued weakness rather than dangerous preparation. His refusal to move was accompanied by additional psychological pressure, as he suggested that Maya's desire to leave reflected her inability to handle normal social interaction and academic discussion. The moment of truth arrived when Tyler reached for Maya's backpack and attempted to examine her materials under the pretense of academic interest, crossing the final line from psychological harassment into physical interference that justified defensive action under any reasonable interpretation of self-defense principles. Maya's response was swift and decisive as she stepped back to create distance while simultaneously preparing to defend herself if Tyler's aggression continued to escalate. Tyler's mistake was interpreting Maya's backward step as retreat rather than tactical positioning, encouraging him to advance further and attempt to grab her materials more aggressively. His movement brought him within striking range of someone who had been training for 6 years to defend herself against larger attackers, and Maya's muscle memory responded automatically to the threat he represented through his aggressive behavior and physical intimidation. Maya's first technique was a simple wrist control move designed to prevent Tyler from grabbing her belongings, while demonstrating that she was not the helpless victim he had assumed her to be. The speed and precision of her movements surprised Tyler and caused him to stumble backward, creating space between them while drawing attention from other students who had been observing their interaction with growing concern about its direction. Tyler's shock at Maya's physical competence quickly transformed into anger and embarrassment, as he realized that his assumptions about her weakness had been completely wrong. His immediate response was to advance more aggressively while making loud comments about Maya's violent tendencies and unstable behavior, attempting to reframe the situation so that she appeared to be the aggressor, despite his own pattern of harassment and intimidation. Maya's second technique came when Tyler lunged forward to grab her arm, apparently intending to physically restrain her, while continuing his verbal assault. Her defensive response was a textbook arm drag that redirected his momentum while maintaining her own balance and positioning, causing Tyler to stumble past her and crash into an empty chair with embarrassing clumsiness that drew laughter from observing students. The library erupted in chaos as Tyler's friends moved to support him, while other students gathered to watch the unprecedented spectacle of someone successfully defending themselves against the school's most notorious bully. Maya remained calm and centered despite the commotion around her, maintaining perfect defensive posture while monitoring all potential threats and preparing for whatever escalation might follow Tyler's humiliation. Tyler's rage at being outmaneuvered by Maya overcame his strategic thinking as he abandoned any pretense of academic discussion or reasonable behavior in favor of open aggression that revealed his true character to everyone present. His loud threats and attempts to rally his friends for a coordinated attack on Maya crossed clearly into territory that even sympathetic observers could not dismiss as mutual conflict or misunderstanding. Maya's martial arts training had prepared her for exactly this situation, where initial defensive success might provoke more dangerous retaliation from attackers who refused to accept defeat gracefully. Her positioning and mental state reflected years of practice in managing multiple opponents while maintaining emotional control and strategic thinking, despite the stress of real confrontation. Mrs. Walsh's arrival at the scene of disturbance came too late to prevent the initial conflict, but in time to witness Tyler's increasingly aggressive behavior and obvious attempts to physically intimidate Maya, despite her calm and non-threatening demeanor. The librarian's assessment of the situation was influenced by the testimony of student witnesses who confirmed that Maya had been trying to leave peacefully when Tyler blocked her path and initiated physical contact. Tyler's attempt to explain the situation as mutual aggression was undermined by his flushed face, disheveled appearance, and obvious emotional instability compared to Maya's composed and respectful response to Mrs. Walsh's questions about what had occurred. The contrast between their demeanors made it clear to any objective observer who had been the aggressor and who had been defending themselves from unwanted attention and physical interference. Maya's decision to file a formal complaint about Tyler's harassment marked the beginning of her transformation from passive victim to active advocate for justice and accountability. Her detailed account of 3 years of systematic psychological torture, academic sabotage, and escalating intimidation provided school administrators with a comprehensive picture of Tyler's behavior that could no longer be dismissed as typical teenage conflict or mutual antagonism. The investigation that followed Maya's complaint revealed the sophistication and extent of Tyler's harassment campaign as other students began coming forward with their own experiences of intimidation and abuse. The pattern of behavior that emerged painted a picture of systematic bullying that had created a culture of fear among scholarship students and others who lacked the social protection that Tyler's group enjoyed through their family connections. Maya's newfound confidence inspired other victims of Tyler's harassment to speak up about their experiences, creating a cascade of testimony that demonstrated the broad impact of his behavior on the school's academic and social environment. Students who had been afraid to report incidents began sharing stories of stolen assignments, social exclusion, and psychological pressure that revealed Tyler's methods and their effects on his targets' academic performance and mental health. The transformation in Maya's daily experience at Lincoln Valley High School was immediate and dramatic, as word spread about her successful defense against Tyler's latest attack. Students who had previously avoided her out of fear of becoming targets themselves began approaching her with expressions of support and admiration for her courage in standing up to the school's most feared bully. Teachers who had witnessed Maya's increased confidence and classroom participation began recognizing her as a serious student whose previous quiet demeanor had masked significant intellectual abilities and academic dedication. Her improved performance and more active engagement with coursework reflected her liberation from the constant anxiety about Tyler's harassment that had been undermining her educational progress for 3 years. Maya's relationship with her mother also began improving as her increased confidence and sense of personal agency carried over into their home interactions. Lin Chen noticed her daughter's improved mood and stronger posture, interpreting these changes as signs of successful adjustment to American teenage life, rather than understanding their connection to Maya's martial arts training and recent confrontations at school. The ripple effects of Maya's stand against Tyler extended throughout the school's social hierarchy as students began questioning the power structures that had allowed his harassment campaign to continue unchallenged for so long. The revelation that Tyler could be successfully resisted by someone with proper training and determination inspired other students to consider their own options for addressing bullying and intimidation in their daily lives. Maya's martial arts training took on new meaning and purpose as Master Kim recognized that his student had successfully applied her skills in real-world self-defense while maintaining the emotional control and moral principles that define true martial arts mastery. Their conversations about the appropriate use of physical techniques and the responsibility that came with martial arts knowledge helped Maya process her experiences while preparing for potential future challenges. The week ended with Maya feeling genuinely hopeful about her future at Lincoln Valley High School for the first time in 3 years, but she understood that Tyler's humiliation and the investigation into his behavior would likely provoke retaliation attempts that could be more dangerous than his previous harassment campaigns. Maya's preparation for whatever challenges lay ahead reflected her transformation from passive victim to confident defender, who would never again allow others to determine her worth or limit her potential through fear and intimidation. The investigation into Tyler's harassment campaign unfolded swiftly as Principal Foster faced mounting pressure from parents and school board members who had learned about the systematic bullying that had been occurring under his administration. Maya's detailed documentation of incidents, combined with testimony from multiple victims, created an undeniable pattern of behavior that could no longer be dismissed or minimized by administrators who had previously protected Tyler through willful ignorance. Tyler's attempt to salvage his reputation through damage control backfired spectacularly when he tried to portray Maya as the real aggressor during emergency meetings with school officials. His claims about her supposed martial arts training and violent intentions were undermined by witness testimony, confirming that Maya had only defended herself after Tyler had physically blocked her path and attempted to grab her belongings. The stark contrast between Tyler's emotional instability during questioning and Maya's calm, factual responses further damaged his credibility. The turning point came when Marcus Webb's father, attempting to protect his son from association with Tyler's scandal, provided administrators with text messages and social media evidence documenting the group's harassment planning and coordination. The digital trail revealed the sophisticated nature of their campaign against Maya and other vulnerable students, including specific strategies for academic sabotage and psychological pressure that constituted clear violations of the school's anti-bullying policies. Tyler's expulsion was announced during a special assembly where Principal Foster outlined new anti-bullying measures and acknowledged the administration's failures in protecting students from systematic harassment. Jake Morrison and Marcus Webb received lengthy suspensions and were removed from their leadership positions in student government and athletics, while Ryan Foster's involvement created a conflict of interest that forced his mother to recuse herself from disciplinary proceedings. Maya's transformation became complete as she emerged as a voice for student safety and academic integrity, working with administrators to develop better reporting systems and support networks for harassment victims. Her collaboration with Master Kim resulted in the establishment of a school-sponsored self-defense program that taught students both physical techniques and conflict resolution skills, creating positive outlets for dealing with aggression and intimidation. The academic consequences for Tyler extended beyond Lincoln Valley High School as colleges that had been recruiting him for football scholarships withdrew their offers after learning about his disciplinary record and character issues. His father's construction company faced public relations challenges as community members questioned whether they wanted to support businesses associated with bullying and harassment of young people. Maya's college applications benefited tremendously from her newfound confidence and leadership role in school reform efforts, with admissions officers recognizing her resilience and moral courage as exceptional qualities that would contribute to campus communities. Her essay about overcoming adversity through martial arts training and standing up for justice became a compelling narrative that distinguished her from other academically qualified applicants. The broader cultural impact at Lincoln Valley High School was profound, as Maya's example inspired a fundamental shift in how students and faculty addressed bullying and social hierarchies based on family wealth and athletic status. The zero-tolerance policies that emerged from the investigation created a safer environment where academic merit and character mattered more than social connections and inherited privilege. Maya's relationship with her mother strengthened significantly as Lin Chen learned about her daughter's courage and the extent of challenges she had overcome without complaint or self-pity. The pride and admiration that replaced Lin's previous concerns about Maya's social adjustment reflected her recognition that her daughter possessed the strength and character to succeed in any environment. 3 months after Tyler's expulsion, Maya stood before the Lincoln Valley student body as the newly elected student council president, having run on a platform of transparency, academic integrity, and protection for all students regardless of their background or social status. Her victory represented not just personal triumph but systematic change in the school's power structures and values. The final confrontation with Tyler came unexpectedly during Maya's college graduation ceremony 4 years later, when she encountered him working as a security guard at the university venue. Their brief conversation revealed that Tyler had struggled academically and professionally after his expulsion, never fully recovering from the consequences of his harassment campaign. Maya's gracious but firm interaction demonstrated how completely she had moved beyond his ability to intimidate or diminish her achievements. Maya's career as a civil rights attorney specializing in educational discrimination cases grew directly from her experiences at Lincoln Valley High School, where she learned that systematic injustice could only be defeated through courage, documentation, and persistent advocacy for accountability. Her legal work helped hundreds of students facing similar harassment while establishing precedents that strengthened anti-bullying protections nationwide. Master Kim's pride in his former student was evident when Maya returned to teach advanced classes at his academy, passing on not just martial arts techniques, but also the wisdom about when and how to use physical skills appropriately in defense of justice and personal dignity. Her story became legendary among students who learned that true strength came from moral courage rather than physical dominance. Maya's wedding invitation to Tyler, sent to his last known address 5 years after graduation, included a note thanking him for teaching her that some people mistake kindness for weakness but discover too late that quiet strength runs deeper than loud aggression. Whether Tyler received the invitation remained unknown, but Maya's gesture represented her complete transformation from victim to victor who could afford to be generous even toward those who had once sought to destroy her. The scholarship fund that Maya established in her father's name provided support for students facing harassment and discrimination, ensuring that future generations would have resources and advocates when confronting systematic bullying and academic sabotage. Her legacy extended far beyond her personal victory to create lasting change that protected vulnerable students and promoted genuine educational excellence. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.